I am here with Father Séamus Doyle, who has written a wonderful new book. It is First Century Seekers, Eyewitnesses to the Gospel. So tell us about the book.
When it started out as about, 15 years ago or so, I was leading a weekend retreat for divorced, separated, and widowed.
Mm-hmm.
And the gospel story for that Sunday was the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm.
And it dawned on me, we don't know anything about her except that she had 5 husbands.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy she was living with was not her husband, it was somebody else's husband. So I started to think, what happened to her? And it just started to come. She married young. She had 3 children, all of whom died. Her husband got mad at her, said that she was cursed because her parents her parents had her when they were late in life, and therefore she couldn't carry children. So he gave her a bill of divorce. She married a second time, got pregnant again 2 or 3 times. The same thing happened. One of them even lived beyond birth and then died. And her second husband said that her first husband was correct, that it was her parents' fault, that she was crazy and all this stuff. Then she married a 3rd time. This time she fell in love with this guy. He was really a neat guy. And, she wasn't having children, but she loved this man and he loved her. And then he got sick and died. So then, without going into the rest of them, the next thing was, she was in her 20s. She has had 5 husbands, and the women that used to walk with her to the well are now abandoning her. She's left her to walk on her own. And she goes out one day, and here's this guy. He's a Jew, and he's asked her for a cup of water, and she looks at him and says, "Who do you think you are asking me? Because you're a Jew and you're not supposed to talk to me." And they got into a conversation, and he said, if you had asked me, I would have given you living water. And she says, "Give it to me because I am tired of coming out here on my own, and, I don't want to have to do this." Mm-hmm. And then suddenly she realized she's talking theology. Mm-hmm. Is this the right place to go to pray on the mountain? Do you go to Jerusalem? Where do you go? And then she thought, you must be a prophet. You're a holy man. And she took off and to tell the folks. And she began to realize that she was okay. Mm-hmm. But, just before that, she had gone to her rabbi and told him she had stopped believing in God, that she felt more affinity with the desert because it was dry and barren and had, at least every 7 years it could give life, but she couldn't. And so she had stopped believing in God, and her rabbi told her that there was no place for her in the synagogue if she didn't believe in God, and that what she ought to do is stop asking questions about politics and things going on that are the property of men, not women. Mm-hmm. So forget that. So anyway, she met Jesus. She came back and she became his first female apostle. Mm-hmm. And then Jesus came and stayed, and she was shocked when Jesus told her that she had a husband that was not her husband. That's when she realized he was a holy man. And then the end of the story is the guy got a divorce and they got married, and I can't remember whether Jesus came to the wedding or missed it, but anyway, it was a nice ending.
Specifically said that.
No, it didn't say it, but in my story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, in your story, because I read it last night, that I don't think it said specifically that Jesus.
And you happened to read the right one.
I did. That was providential. So
thereafter, I just, the story of Bartimaeus, the blind man, came up, and then I wrote his story. And so different ones. The one I loved was the David, the widow's son of Nahum. That's all we know about him was they were going out to bury him, and Jesus came up and said, "Young man, I said to you, arise." Mm-hmm. And so with that, I created this story of David. Yeah. And what's running through the whole book it's reconnecting you to different stories that these people, well, obviously they didn't live within 100 miles, with 30 miles of one another. Sure. So they would have known, if this was reality, they would have known one another. Mm-hmm. And then the steward at the wedding feast of Cana, I just loved him. So he's telling the story of the background of what happened and
Right.
seeing Mary coming in and telling Jesus, look, you have to do something.
And you better listen to this guy.
And you better listen to him. She had command of that house.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So when I finished the book, I sent it to a friend of mine in Ireland, and he said, it's finished, but it's not finished. You need to add something. And that's when I added the little play about the resurrection, about one of them coming in and saying, Mary's gone crazy. She thinks she saw Jesus. And the other guy said, she's not the only one who thinks she saw Jesus. And they're saying, well, we better get out of here before we're all gone nuts. And, and then Peter comes in and says, the body's missing. And that reaffirms that they need to get out before they caught. And then they start meeting once a week. And then they begin to, what they do in the play, what they finish up doing is inviting people to come tell their story. Mm-hmm. So that's where the stories, the importance, when we get together, how did we become Christian? I mean, some of us are born into the Christian community, we're confirmed, baptized, and we never really give it a second thought. What I love baptizing are adults because they think their way through, why am I getting baptized? Why am I getting confirmed? What's the importance of this? And so these people are telling why Jesus was important to them. And there's a sense of humor. The woman that was bent over in the synagogue, and Jesus puts his hand on her, and she's like, "Oh my God, he's putting his hand on me in public, in the synagogue." And then she feels the heat of his hand, and she feels the power of what we would call what they would call today Reiki, what do you call them? Therapy. Mm-hmm. And so those things just run through the stories, and at the end they're kind of pulled together. And it's coming back to my belief that we're at a point where the vast majority of us that are attending church now are in 60s. Mm-hmm. And young people are looking for spirituality, not a church. And maybe it's time we started looking for house churches and home churches where people can sit around a cup of coffee. Or the whole thing about having a meal came up. And Mary says to Peter, he said more than about do this in memory of having a meal. And he said, what did he say? She said, do this in memory of me, not in memory of what's going to happen to me tomorrow, mm-hmm. which is the death and resurrection, but what's happened to me, which is his life and teaching. Mm-hmm. So when we have the meal in memory of his life and teachings, when we participate in that meal, we're saying, this is the way I want to live. Mm-hmm. I want to live healing somebody that's hurt, giving somebody a sense of a smile on their face and a sense of wholeness. Right. This is how I want to live. So to me, that's what the Eucharist is about, making a daily or a weekly or a monthly or however one comes to church to that gathering, saying, I'm committed to this way of life. So that's a lot more than what you asked for.
No, that's great. That's wonderful. To go back, so the sort of the context or the setting for these stories is these early church gatherings.
Right, exactly.
People telling their stories. And I love how you set that and really play with I guess we're all together, and thanks for so-and-so for hosting us. And
exactly.
That sort of...
If you go to an AA meeting, you have an opening prayer and the reading, and then somebody in what they call speakers meetings, somebody gets up and tells their experience, strength, and hope. Mm-hmm. This is what, if on Sunday morning we do something, we have the reading, and then you and I and other ministers tell that story and kind of give life to it. But I think if we told our own story, if people would stand up and say, this week this happened to me, and I just had an opportunity to say thank God, and I really meant it because I never thought of that, or I asked God's help, right? And it was wonderful. So I think, without going emotionalism and all that, sure, there's some very strong things that happen to people mm-hmm. that they're not comfortable the way we have set up church now. Like the day the squirrel got loose in the Mississippi church, that old song.
No.
You need to read that and listen to that one. But, the squirrel got loose and it ran up everybody's leg and whatnot, and they were all screaming what they had done wrong.
Oh.
Confessing. That's not what I'm talking about. I think
Right.
it's what we're talking about is an honest to God gut feeling. This is what grew out of reading the scripture this week. I have a couple of friends of mine up in Harrison that have now, for the last 4 months, have set aside 30 minutes a day to read the scriptures.
Right.
And it's amazing what it has done for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. And the nice thing is they call me and tell me about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so much of our experience, especially when we look at the early church, is just the telling those stories.
Right.
This is how God has affected my life. Here's my interaction with Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's something that we don't always spend the time with in the modern church.
Yeah. Sure.
And it's something, as you were saying before, that there's a thirst for those stories. And there's a thirst for, don't tell me about theology. Tell me about your lived experience. What is it like to be Christian?
Yeah.
How has God interacted with you?
And when you do that with maybe 8 or 9 people, over a cup of coffee, over a meal, it doesn't have to be a big meal, finger food, whatever.
Sure.
Do this in memory of me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so today I give a cup of water. What big difference was that? I stopped downtown, I opened the window, I handed a homeless man a bottle of water. I gave him a $5 ticket to McDonald's. But as I drove off, this is what happened to me. This is what it made me think, made me grateful for my car, for the gas, for the ability to be able to do this. And now so you get into talking about gratitude and thanksgiving and then how somebody else in the group might say, I never thought of doing that. And so this is how we build community. We deepen our spirituality. We deepen that, I never thought of Jesus in relationship to opening that window. Now it makes sense. This is what I'm doing in memory of Jesus. So that's the kind of practical theology.
Practical theology, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Practice.
So, and as I said, you wouldn't get that in a 300-member church, or let alone 5,000.
Well, and you were pointing to, sort of almost that model of AA as this, just let's get together and share our stories. And maybe there's a time for a speaker, or maybe there's just time where we're all going to share. This is what my week
Well,
looked
usually
like.
the speaker speaks about 15, 20, 25 minutes, and then it's open to the room. And they usually say, we have so many people today, let's keep our sharing till 3 minutes or 5 minutes.
Sure, yeah.
And people are really respectful of that. They share their experience and what it meant to them that day.
Right.
So I think this is the same thing that we could do in church if we could get away from the idea that we can only meet on Sunday.
Right.
Meet any day at any time at somebody's house. And then there becomes a place for a monthly gathering, a Sunday, of the community church. This is the domestic church. This is the community church. Yeah. So that's all coming together.
Absolutely. You also have some interesting threads in there, I've noticed, weaving sort of patriarchy and sort of women in prominent sort of leadership and example roles in the early church. That's not something we've seen through the rest of the history. Do you want to say anything about that?
They have been there, but they have not been acknowledged as well as they should have been. I think many of the feminists of the late 60s, early 70s, the women theologians,
Absolutely.
Some of them may have gone overboard, but you have to go overboard to get back to the middle.
Right, absolutely.
And so we're beginning now to look back at the desert mothers, not just the desert fathers.
Absolutely.
You look at that whole wealth of information of not just Roman Catholic, there were Christian nuns, some of them Roman Catholic nuns later on, but women that just said yes, like Mary, and took their chances and really understood this whole. And women, by and large, understand community better than we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they network much better than we do. Yeah. because I'd be afraid if you know more than me or something.
Right,
like
yeah,
that.
we get our egos in the way. And yeah,
You know
absolutely.
what ego stands for?
No, what?
Easing God out.
Oh, that's a good
I
one.
learned that from one of my patients in a psychiatric ward one time. They asked me to give a talk on ego, and I wrote ego on the board. I turned around, I said, what's your definition of ego? He said, easing God out. I said, there goes the talk.
All right, I'm going to just sit down
That's
and
it.
that's it.
Yeah, because what's left,
Right.
if I ease God out,
Absolutely.
then I become God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or the classic definition of sin, of the self sort of focused on sort of literal nasal gazing.
Right.
We're
Exactly.
just focused on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to think of sin as turning my back on God.
Mhm.
And when it says that Jesus didn't sin,
Mhm.
he did get angry.
Yeah.
But he didn't sin. He never turned his back on God.
Absolutely.
God, his Abba, was always there. So yeah.
And also connecting to that biblical understanding of metanoia, that turning around.
Right. Exactly.
Turning back towards God.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
I always say thank God for U-turns.
Absolutely. Is there a story that is particularly special to you in this set?
I think the story of David, the widow's son of Nahum, because he was such a rebel. And you know where I'm heading with that, my background in Northern Ireland and whatnot, and here he is just convinced that the only way to get rid of them is to fight them and blow them out of the country. And Jesus comes along and says, look, live with them and work. And in Northern Ireland, yeah, it took us 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But look at what's happened. We have peace. The people are growing together. It's sad that it's happening now in Ukraine. But there's that sense of the message of Jesus, not peace at any price like the Romans have and the Russians have, but it's peace with respect for one another. And as you learn to respect, then you begin to take a look at history and how this came to be. And then you can begin to look at possible changes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's what's happened in the church. We tore apart. Now we're beginning to look at one another and say, we need to come back together.
Absolutely.
Because we all believe the same message.
And there are things that are in your tradition that are not in mine, and we can learn from each other.
Right. Exactly. And so that, to me, comes from respect, not tolerance.
Absolutely.
But absolute, complete respect.
Yes.
Because then I want to know why, and I want to share, and I want to learn. Mm-hmm. And that brings us together. And I think that's what happened to David in that situation. Yeah.
It also brings up, I was noticing another thread of sort of nationalism and sort of Jewish nationalism within the story. And I connected it, obviously, to sort of more American Christian nationalism and
fundamentalism.
And
it's the ism that is the problem.
Yes.
That and I understand that from my background. Believe me, I have a very strong nationalistic background.
Sure.
But once I saw the light, it was when I was in seminary, I had to write a paper on using violence as an ends to a mean. I couldn't finish it. I couldn't. I could not justify violence as an ends to a mean, and I had to rethink everything that I grew up. Irish poems, Irish stories, Irish news. There's a song in the movie South Pacific. You have to be carefully taught before you're 6 or 7 or 8 how to hate. And it goes on talking about hating people with the slanty eyes, people with a different color. And it's true. Nobody ever says to you, you hate these people. But in the poetry, the songs, and news and conversation, if you're just in that group of people, you learn to hate. You learn you can't have a different mindset. You have to really step out of it. Yeah. And when I was working in the field of alcohol and drug abuse, I used to be fascinated. You get a family that are drug addicted and they'd steal anything, and you get this one kid that walks out of there. And I don't understand. They have a straight as an arrow that wouldn't touch anything that didn't belong to them. And how they got it, and we're so different. Yeah. It says an awful lot about grace and responding to grace.
It really does.
Yeah. Sure. Does it? But each of us has to come to Jesus, come to God, come to spirituality, come to Buddha, whatever, in our own way. I think that's the important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up that very narrow. We were more Catholic than the Pope and more Irish than the President of Ireland.
Right.
And look at me today, sitting here and talking about Buddhism and anything.
Right. Yeah.
You know, God is with us all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We may call God by different names, but God is our Father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
That's great. Where is this book available? Where can people get this?
Well, I was talked into self-publishing this.
Okay.
And that can be a good job if you don't have another job.
Right.
But I have other things to do. Right now, it's available at MULES on David Avenue. It's Barnes & Noble on Veterans Boulevard. It's at the Father Seelos Shrine. And if anybody wants to send a $20 check to St. John's Episcopal Church, I will mail it to them.
Would you like to do a reading? Is that something you would like?
Okay. The biblical story of James and John. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked a favor of him. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Declare these two sons of mine will sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." But Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will indeed drink my cup. But to sit at my right hand and at my left, this is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." So Salome comes to the group on the first day of the week, and she tells her story. "Good evening, everyone. I am so glad to have been able to gather. We have been able to gather today. Sorry that we had to change meeting locations, but such are the times. I understand some of you have heard Zebedee tell his story about Rabbi Jesus. I won't tell his story. I will tell you mine. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Salome, the mother of James and John. I am also an aunt of Jesus, as I am also Mary's sister. Am I not well connected? Let me tell you something. To my nephew Jesus, being well connected did not mean anything. One day we thought he was losing his mind, as he seemed to have been without sleep for a few days and had been talking to people for hours without food. When we tried to get to him, he was told that his mother was looking for him. I couldn't believe the remark he made. "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Then he pointed to his disciples, saying, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." My sister said nothing. But I was not going to let him treat her like that. I took Jesus aside and told him he ought to have more respect for his mother. Did I put my foot in my mouth? Both feet. Jesus just laughed. That was one thing about him that always fascinated me. Nothing ever seemed to bother him. It was as if he had a bigger picture of the world than the rest of us. He looked at life and our beliefs from a frame of reference not known to anyone else in the family or in the synagogue. He had a point of view about family and the Lord that few people understood then or now. His understanding of the Torah was refreshingly different, and yet many of his family thought if they were associated with him, they too might get tainted with being his followers. Incredible as it may appear, the reality was that some of our family put a lot of distance between them and Jesus. Jesus never complained. He loved them anyhow. But that's not the point of my story. What I want to tell you is about how I really put my foot in my mouth by asking that my sons sit one at his right and the other at his left in his administration. Mary and I talked about Jesus, and she let me know she was concerned about him in a good way. She kept telling me she had no idea how he came to the ideas he was teaching. I thought I listened to him carefully, but I came to a different conclusion than Zebedee. Zebedee knew my sister Mary first. He met her when he came looking for someone to build his boats and was directed to Joseph. Mary was 4 years older than I. Zebedee's first wife had died in childbirth. After her death, he turned all his energy into building his own fishing business. He worked even harder than ever before. The marriage which had arranged for me failed to materialize as the young man was killed in a revolt against the Romans. Joseph suggested that a marriage be arranged between Zebedee and me, and soon we were betrothed and married. It was my belief that Jesus was God's champion who was going to bring Israel into a leadership position in the world with peace and justice instead of war. Zebedee did not trust the Zionist movement, and he worked too closely with the Romans to be associated with anyone with rebel tendencies. Zebedee looked at the Roman situation, as he called it, like a businessman. War, he said, was good for some businesses and not good for others. He did not, however, believe that Israel should stand a prolonged fight with the Romans. He did not want any of his friends, and certainly not his sons, killed in a senseless skirmish with them either. I knew our sons looked up to Jesus as a leader. Despite his initial misgivings, Zebedee talked to Jesus and eventually gave his blessing for James and John to join him as soon as he was ready. As I said, it was my conviction that Jesus should be king. I thought he would be a better king than David, as he had more ethics and justice than any of our other kings. He was fascinating. What was fascinating about him was that many of the Romans loved him as he talked with them. He even brought the child of a centurion back to life. The wife of one of the Roman centurions became a follower of his. I chose to believe Jesus was creating signs that the days of vengeance were coming to an end, that peace was coming closer. The ones we were more afraid of were our own religious leaders. They had become puppets of Herod rather than real religious leaders. These men looked at Jesus as a rebellious peasant upstart who was bent on the disruption of the commerce of the temple. James and John often talked a lot about what they would do or what they would like to do in the kingdom when it would be established. They were not, however, like their dad. I took it upon myself to make what I thought was a reasonable request. Much as I wanted to see Jesus as God's champion and free of us from the Romans, he did not appear to have any plans for an immediate army. With no army, Jesus was not going to get far. However, having listened to his powers of persuasion, there was nothing I felt certain Jesus could not do. We, like so many others, placed incredible expectations on him. Probably it was more difficult for me because he was family, and I wanted to see him king. Mary did not share my enthusiasms and avoided any discussion on the topic. I was not about to stand by and watch my children support him and then not be rewarded. I had seen that with Herod's family too many times, so I simply waited till I got a good opportunity and then hit him with it. I'm embarrassed. As I think about it now, I actually got on my knees and said, "Declare that these two sons of mine will sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." I was begging him to announce the positions he would give them in his kingdom. Jesus just put out his hand, turned my face upwards, knelt beside me, looked directly into my eyes in his calm, gentle manner, and then looked at my sons. There was that gentleness about him that told you he cared, and at the same time a strength that let one know he knew who he really was in charge. He looked at James and John and simply asked them if they believed they had what it took to be in leadership positions. Like me, they impulsively said yes. I expected that out of them. They were ambitious, but they lacked that ingredient which gave them the courage of their convictions. They had the ability to do anything provided they had a strong leader to follow. They had an incredible faith in Jesus. They worshipped the ground he walked on. I knew in my heart the love they had for Jesus and that they would die for him if they had to. It was much later when I came to understand more of what Jesus was really about. His was not to be an earthly kingdom. The peace he brought was treacherous, one might say. Only those who walked in the path he taught could find that peace. It was a path of inner peace. It was a path that included everyone. James and John were well equipped to handle that. And as I discovered even more, James gave his life for his belief in Jesus. Initially, Zebedee and I became silent followers of Jesus. After his crucifixion, we thought it all over. Then we heard word that he had appeared to Mary Magdalene, some of the other women, and also to some of his disciples. About 40 days after he died, Peter and the rest decided it was time to stop hiding and to continue the work that Jesus had begun. So we joined them in that great work of bringing people back to God and living up to our covenant with the Lord. I don't think, in fact, I know, if I have never been at peace within myself in my life as I am these days. I never considered having Samaritans as friends. I never thought I'd see the day I'd have Romans sitting at my table. Jesus' ways are definitely God's ways, and it's sometimes difficult to live up to his standards. I am so grateful to have these memorial meals so we can share our experience and get strength from one another to this great work. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Awesome. Wonderful. Again, I like the rawness and the messiness. Thanks for meeting us here because, we signs of the times and whatever reason we couldn't meet at that other house. Now we're at this house and working out sort of. And
how often we have to do that. And
absolutely.
These days, last minute changes, COVID, absolutely. Whatever.
Yeah. Right. So
these things happen and they all work out for the best if we take a breath and relax.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And if you're interested in getting a copy yourself, the information will be on the screen again for you to get your own copy. And thank you.
Thank you. Doyle. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. All right. So we're recording, so we'll go ahead and start.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, right. I just started it up.
Or invited somebody from the congregation up to say, how did Jesus impact your life? Let me kill that thing. Sorry. All this stuff is great, but you have to remember what to do when.
Yes.
Sorry.
How to turn it back on.
Oh, yeah, I was saying that if we